Open spaces that take your breath away. During the pandemic, visiting our parks, it's how a lot of people are doing summer vacation. My family drove out to Utah to see parks there.
I couldn't even believe that places that beautiful exist. That's how blown away I was.
But something was also missing.
I think you could count on one hand or two hands the number of African American families that I saw.
So I dug a little, and I found some research that backs that up. Surveys of national parks show less than 2% of visitors are Black, less than 5% are Hispanic, less than 5% are Asian. So what I want to know is why so few people of color are visiting parks. My first stop is a hidden gem, the sprawling Fort Worth Nature Center.
I'll do elbow. Elbow. Hey, David. Nice to meet you.
And I'm meeting with Dr. Jared Williams. He's a community organizer.
Grateful that we have spaces where, we can get away from the hustle and bustle of the city.
Jared is an advocate for lowering the barriers that keep minorities out of parks, and he recently announced that he's running for city council. But before Jared and I even arrived at the park, you could not miss the name of the highway exit to get there.
Confederate Park Road.
What did you think when you saw that?
What I felt was a bit of uneasiness and anxiety that's rooted in, both my experiences and my family's experiences.
Jared's telling me that historically, most people who've worked in the parks and sat on the boards are white, and they're the ones making the decisions.
There's a lot of decisions that leaders make in rooms where if we limit the perspectives that are at the table, the outcomes we get are rooted in the perspective that was at the table. And so I imagine, people of color weren't always at the table in the early history of forming a park.
Okay, let's go to another park now. Cedar Hill State Park, south of Dallas, is surrounded by communities with large African American populations. But researchers found that Blacks only make up 11% of the visitors here. Dr. Kang J. Jerry Lee is a professor of parks, recreation, and tourism at North Carolina State University.
Parks were created as a white space, and it's for white people, and white middle class and upper class to be specific.
There is an African American man. I'm in Central Park.
That sentiment of parks as white spaces was on display in Central Park last spring in New York when a white woman called police after a birdwatcher asked her to put her dog on a leash. In his 2016 paper, Dr. Lee interviewed Black people who live near Cedar Hill about why they don't use the park. Many told him Black families culturally haven't spent time in big state and national parks, and so a love of the outdoors is not something that gets passed down generation to generation.
It has a lot to do with the larger structural issues that persist in American society that constantly devastate people of color.
Dr. Lee says parks also have a long history of segregation, and he says parks themselves tend to only celebrate white history. That's true at Cedar Hill. Before it was a park, it was a farm owned by the Penn family.
When I review historical documents, turns out a lot of Penn family owned slaves. A lot of them were slaveholders, and after they acquired slaves, then they were able to accumulate significant wealth out of their slave labor. But that history was not presented in the park.
I guess what Dr. Lee is talking about is when you walk around this park and you read the signs that talk about the buildings, they don't mention the fact that enslaved people lived and worked here too. And that seems to be missing from the story.
For most of the team, it's their first attempt at a summit of this magnitude.
When it comes to minorities who like to get outside, this expedition made history. The first all-Black group to climb Mount Denali in Alaska. James Mills is a journalist and activist who developed this concept, then made a movie about it and wrote a book. James says many pioneering minorities have been written out of the story of the outdoors, and it's time to write them back in.
You literally have the, kind of white male conquistador mentality of who spends time in the outdoors, and that gets codified into our popular culture.
James thinks you should know about people like Dr. Charles Crenshaw, an engineer who worked on the Apollo space program. In 1964, he became the first African American to summit Denali. And Charles Young, born into slavery, he became the third African American graduate of West Point, was the first black national park superintendent, and led the Buffalo Soldiers in helping establish Yosemite Park.
I've been to Yosemite dozens, if not hundreds of times. And here I am in my mid-40s hearing this story for the first time. And it kind of occurred to me that if I hadn't heard this story based on my background, that means that millions of people hadn't heard this story either.
Today, Yosemite does tell that story. But with so many urgent problems to solve, like police brutality against unarmed black men, is making parks more accessible to all people really that important?
If you're asking me, is it more important that we have a police force that isn't killing black people? Okay, of course that's important. It's not an either or paradigm. It's an if and. Okay, if we're going to make sure that everyone has the freedom to do and to go and experience the things that are most important to them, we have to make it safe for them, and we have to make sure that there are plenty of resources that allow them to do it in a way that is meaningful to them.
So I've learned at least a few reasons why minorities are underrepresented at big parks. When parks only promote the stories of white people, we erase the contributions of minorities. When we exclude minorities from the process of making decisions about parks, their voices are not heard. And if you do visit a park and don't see other people who look like you, the message is, this space isn't for you. Got something you want verified? Send me an email.